Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of The Evil of the Daleks, a story where the Daleks require the Doctor's help in their latest scheme in taking over the universe. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted for more content. Following the conclusion of the previous story, The Faceless Ones, the Doctor and Jamie find themselves on the trail of finding out who has stolen the TARDIS, eventually coming across the antiques dealer, Edward Waterfield, who brings them back to his own time in 1866, where the Daleks are waiting and require the Doctor's help in extracting the human factor. The Evil of the Daleks was Patrick Troughton's seventh story and brought the end to his first season as the Doctor, during which he was challenged with taking over from William Hartnell and taking the character in a new direction, while still maintaining the core values. While the curiosity of the Time Lord remained, Troughton would play the fool whilst plotting behind the scenes. However, the fool aspect of the Doctor is reduced since the Doctor is already known and anticipated to the key guest characters in the Daleks, and that part of the character therefore remains redundant. During the first episode, he is acting in a detective role, in noticing clues to track down the TARDIS, which eventually brings them to Waterfield's antique shop, and realising something isn't right when he sees that the antiques are genuine but look brand new. Once the Doctor and Jamie are kidnapped by Waterfield and brought back to 1866, the Doctor then takes the role of scientist and researcher when being blackmailed by the Daleks, Waterfield and Maxtible, to use Jamie as a guinea pig and monitor the tests his companion undergoes to understand the human factor that the Daleks crave. What is interesting is that the Doctor's realisation that the Daleks are the culprits. He discovers that he has walked into a trap and has been outwitted by his greatest adversary. From there, he realises that to protect Jamie, he must put their friendship to the test by giving the impression to his companion that he is in league with the Daleks, and push him into a situation to make him angry and disenchanted with the Doctor, causing him to question his desire to carry on travelling with him. From there, the Doctor monitors Jamie, embarking on the test set up in league with the Daleks to monitor his human behaviours to obtain necessary information for the human factor. The Doctor manages to insert the human factor into 3 Daleks and takes pleasure in the fact that he is dealing with friendly and childlike incarnations of his long-standing adversary, as he makes the revelation to Jamie about the necessity of the tests. The Doctor and his friends then find themselves on the Dalek's home planet of Skaro, where he has long anticipated the confrontation with the Dalek Emperor. Once again, he is put into a compromising situation by the Daleks to make efforts to install the Dalek factor into humanity, and yet again he has to give the impression of siding with the Daleks by pretending to have the Dalek factor installed into himself, whilst in reality it allows the opportunity for the human factor to be installed into the Daleks and create a civil war. With The Evil of the Daleks, we are presented with a Doctor placed in a battle of wits with his enemy, and having fallen twice into their trap, has to resort to underhand tactics where even his closest friends start to doubt him, but to give the Daleks the impression that they are the ones holding the advantage over the Doctor, whilst in reality he is ruining their scheme. This is a prime example of the lengths the Doctor will go to in order for good to prevail over evil, and it's this tactic that has since been reused with other incarnations of the Doctor, in particular the 4th Doctor in The Invasion of Time and the 7th Doctor in The Curse of Fenric, and further exemplifies the influence Patrick Troughton's characterisation of the 2nd Doctor, and how it sets out as a template for other actors fulfilling the role. This was Jamie McCrimmon's 6th story, having joined earlier this season in the story The Highlanders, and here we see him carry on his character development starting in the previous story The Faceless Ones, with previous characters Ben and Polly having been phased out of the series. What's interesting in The Evil of the Daleks is that although this is Jamie's first and only TV appearance opposite the Daleks, the story does away with the traditional introduction of the famous adversary. Ben had mentioned them in Jamie's second adventure, The Underwater Menace, so you'd assume that the Daleks at some point would have been described to him prior to this story. Ever faithful to the Doctor, he is initially by his side in the search of the TARDIS. However, he starts to question the Doctor when he sees him initially working alongside Edward Waterfield, who he holds responsible for the murder of the character Kennedy in the first episode, with further doubt coming in when he sees the Doctor working with the Daleks. In between those moments, Jamie sees a portrait of Edward Waterfield's deceased wife, who he finds beautiful, only to be informed that his daughter, Victoria, is the spitting image of her. When, upon discovering that she is being held captive by the Daleks, Jamie sets about rescuing her in partnership with Theodore Maxtible's mute Turkish servant, Kemal. Unbeknown is that the Doctor is reluctantly using him as the guinea pig for the Daleks' experiment. Eventually successful in rescuing Victoria, Jamie seems initially compelled by being infatuated with her, but also portraying the young action man persona by participating in the physical aspects of the story, whilst the Doctor plays out the battle of wits with the story's antagonists. It would become an undercurrent theme during Victoria's tenure on board the TARDIS from this story onwards that Jamie sorts out to protect her with the Doctor, but you suspect he's still attracted to Victoria. Regarding the Doctor, this is a story that is a decisive moment in Jamie understanding the Doctor and knowing when he puts on an act to fool the antagonists, and this shows towards the story's conclusion when Jamie is the one to realise that the Doctor is fooling the Daleks when pretending to have the Dalek factor installed into him. Edward Waterfield begins this story as the mysterious antiques dealer who orchestrates the theft of the TARDIS from Gatwick Airport through his connections. As well as the Doctor and Jamie, his employees are also suspicious of his authentic yet brand new looking antiques, but Waterfield keeps their silence with impressive wages. It transpires that Waterfield is from 1866 and has been sent forward in time by 100 years by the Daleks to steal the TARDIS and bring the Doctor and Jamie back to the 19th century. Once there, Waterfield is revealed to be a scientist exploring the possibilities of time travel using static electricity and mirrors, which brought him to the attention of the Daleks. The vice the Daleks hold over Waterfield is that they are currently holding his daughter Victoria as hostage, and as a result is dependent on the Doctor fulfilling the Daleks' request for the survival of Victoria. When the story begins, the mysterious nature of Waterfield brings about the possibility of him being an antagonist of the story, and the audience suspicions can be reinforced when discovering he is in league with the Daleks. However, as the story progresses, the mysterious nature of Waterfield switches to sympathy upon the realisation he is operating in this manner due to the danger his daughter is in. He later starts assisting the Doctor in defeating the Daleks when they are transported to Skaro, where he sacrifices his life in order to save the Doctor from being exterminated. Theodore Maxtible is a businessman and scientist who is Edward Waterfield's financier and owner of the mansion where they both operate, and later where the Daleks set up the experiments for the extraction of the human factor. Unlike Waterfield, he stays behind in the 19th century and is welcoming to the arrival of the Doctor as an additional scientific mind. Upon the revelation of Maxtible and Waterfield's arrangement with the Daleks, you instantly see that where Waterfield clearly derides the Daleks and is operating out of fear for the life of his daughter, Maxtible acts out of appreciation of the Daleks, with him being promised the secret of alchemy, which allows him to convert base metals into gold. Through this promise, he is more willing and less confrontational than Waterfield, to do what the Daleks are bidding, even though he is putting people near to him at risk. The only time he reacts negatively to the Daleks' actions is when they activate a bomb to destroy his mansion, and as a result, his laboratory, thus destroying all the research into alchemy. The Daleks recognise his greed and exploit it, which in the end is Maxtible's undoing. After travelling to Skaro following the loss of his home, research and disconnection from his friends and family becomes forgotten when the Daleks present to him the secret of alchemy, but upon attempting to access it, he falls into the Daleks' trap and becomes the first human to be subjected of having the Dalek factor installed in him. From there, he becomes a humanised Dalek with improved strength, which allows him to overcome his strong silent servant Kemmel and throw him off the cliff before trying to kill Jamie and Victoria, which is halted when being recalled to the Dalek city to protect the Emperor Dalek, with the assumption that he perishes in the destruction of the city along with the rest of the Daleks. As already mentioned, Victoria Waterfield is Edward Waterfield's daughter, and she is held captive by the Daleks to ensure her father follows their orders. For those of you who have seen the subsequent stories featuring Victoria, you'll be familiar with her tendency to scream at some of the antagonists that she would come across. However, in the case of the Evil of the Daleks, she acts in defiance of the Daleks whilst in captivity, initially refusing to eat the food she is provided and showing reluctance to obey their orders to the point where the Daleks are becoming frustrated with her temperament. For a large portion of the story, Victoria only interacts with the Daleks and acts as a damsel in distress type figure, especially when Jamie and Kemmel embark on their mission to free her. Despite this, she still maintains her strong will and only wanes upon being informed of her father's death at the hands of the Daleks, and with little choice but to join the TARDIS crew, with the Doctor becoming the father figure and Jamie becoming a close friend and possible admirer. Barring their cameo appearance in the Space Museum, this was the Daleks' 7th appearance in just under 4 years in Doctor Who, as well as being their second and final full appearance in the Patrick Troughton era. Here, the Daleks play a different role compared to their direct aggression they were known to exhibit during the William Hartnell era. Rather than being the obvious, in-your-face antagonist, they elect to loom in the shadows and use others that they are in league with to do their dirty work for them, as shown during the first episode when they arranged through several parties to have the TARDIS stolen. Their lurking in the background mentality allows them to lure the Doctor into a false sense of security and into their trap, and upon their revealing themselves to him, make him realise that he is finally at their mercy. Even from that, rather than being in your face, the Daleks just seem to observe and act upon their threat rather than actual action, whilst all parties under their command perform their duties. This is reflected that during the part where the story is set on Earth, they only exterminate 2 characters who don't even play a major role in the story, Kennedy and Toby. Nevertheless, the way they blackmail and bark at those under their control still gives them menace and threat. With the Doctor's research and implementation of the human factor that he installs in 3 Daleks, gone is the menace in their barking electronic voice, and instead you get a voice that, albeit is still electronically treated, gives off a sense of playfulness, enjoyment and fun, as they are reduced to children and resort to playing games with the Doctor, which brings the 5th episode to a close, and leaving us as audience with curiosity and intrigue, as well as still being somewhat disturbed about these expressionless, menacing, murderous antagonists becoming childlike and leaving you wondering if that reduces or heightens their threat. By episode 6, we are introduced to the Dalek Emperor, who is merely loosely implied rather than directly mentioned during the story, when the Daleks reveal that they are receiving orders or being recalled to Skaro. The Emperor is larger than all other Daleks, occupying a large room where it stands connected to the Dalek city, and therefore immobile. It also has its own personal guard of Daleks, who are represented by a black dome and seem to hold authority over the traditional-looking Daleks. Additionally, while the Emperor has an electronic treated voice like normal Daleks, it is louder and deeper to carry the air of authority. From its chamber, it hands out orders, and it is the Emperor who informs the Doctor about the isolation of the Dalek factor that they wish to install into humanity. Although not doing anything in regards of action, its size and voice give off the air of authority of all Daleks, and in the end, it is defeated when civil war breaks out in the city between the traditional Daleks and the Daleks that have the human factor installed. Like Patrick Troughton's debut story, The Power of the Daleks, The Evil of the Daleks was written by Doctor Who's first ever script editor, David Whittaker. Throughout the William Hartnell era, all Dalek stories had been written or co-written by their creator Terry Nation, and by 1965, such was the height of Dalek mania that Nation had a vision that after co-writing the Daleks master plan with Dennis Spooner, he would push the idea of the Daleks to American producers, in the hope of them getting their own TV show separate from Doctor Who. So, by 1966, when the producers wanted to kickstart the Patrick Troughton era with a Dalek story, Nation found himself preoccupied and unavailable to write, but gave his blessing for them to be used. As such, David Whittaker, who had worked with Terry Nation and had provided additional material for the Dalek Invasion of Earth film, as well as writing the debut novel The Daleks, seemed the ideal candidate to write what became The Power of the Daleks. Nation's plan to take the Daleks to America failed, and as such, his interest waned as he focused on writing on other British TV series such as The Avengers, and as such gave his blessing for the Daleks to be killed off from the show, giving Whittaker the opportunity to write his second Dalek story. As with The Power of the Daleks, with The Evil of the Daleks, David Whittaker sets out to give more dimension and depth to the Doctor's antagonists. Here, they wish their identity to remain a secret from the Doctor for as long as possible, and draw on other human characters to carry out their plot as they pull the strings. Even when the Daleks are revealed, Whittaker, while still maintaining their aggressive and bullying nature, uses the arts of threats and promises to encourage characters such as the Doctor, Waterfield and Maxtible to do their bidding, as they watch over and minimise their traditional exterminating to just 3 human characters, with 2 of them being minor characters. Usually, stories of 6 episodes or longer in the classic series can lose their pace, become repetitive, stretched, or boring. Dalek stories did tend to be an exception, as all their 60s stories, with the exception of Mission to the Unknown, were all over 6 episodes, and as such they were set up to boost ratings and encourage audience excitement based on the wave of Dalek mania during the decade. However, as the decade progressed, Dalek mania was quietening down, and the formulaic plot layout that Terry Nation had used was starting to fall into the repetitive nature of the traditional, lengthier Doctor Who stories. As previously pointed out, David Whittaker wrote his Dalek stories from a different perspective and moved away from the Nation's plot layout. With Power of the Daleks, he used the 6-episode format to build up the Dalek threat from 2 inactive Daleks at the start to an army of Daleks by the story's conclusion. With Evil of the Daleks, he addresses the 7-episode quota in a different manner. Rather than sticking to one setting of space and time, the Evil of the Daleks' whole story operates across 3 settings: the 1966 Earth setting, the 1866 Earth setting, and the Skaro setting. Also, each setting is explored before moving on to the next setting, which allows Whittaker to write the story in different styles, and also allowing the use of same characters and getting more out of them based on the reaction to the new surroundings. Prime example of this being Edward Waterfield's character, which alters in each setting, in particular the 20th and 19th century Earth set scenes. For the audience, this breaks any kind of pace or repetition issues, and would allow a near 3-hour story to become easier to digest upon viewing. The idea of a Dalek story operating in multiple locations had been done before with The Chase and the Daleks master plan. However, I feel that The Evil of the Daleks builds on this format due to a stronger storyline and having more 3-dimensional characters other than the Doctor and his companions, and the Daleks themselves. The Evil of the Daleks was directed by Derek Martinez, which is his fourth story, having done Galaxy 4, Mission to the Unknown, and The 10th Planet from the William Hartnell era. A former actor himself, Martinez' style of direction was focused primarily on having the right type of person to fulfill the roles in the story, and as an example, one of the drivers for hiring the experienced stage, TV and film actor Marius Goering to play Theodore Maxtible. As a result, the acting in the story is of a high calibre, with actors such as Windsor Davis and Bridget Forsyth appearing in minor roles in the story, but having acting capabilities that allowed them to go on to have bigger roles in British TV. Having already directed a Dalek story, Martinez was already familiar with the show's most famous antagonists, and went on record saying that the Daleks had to be shot very carefully and from exactly the right angle, and if you shoot them without care, they do look rather tame and ordinary, as well as saying, "You had to build up a Dalek's entrance. I used to make them lurk in the shadows." Unfortunately, episode 2 is the only surviving footage of the original broadcast, but the animated episodes replicate what was originally shot and uses a variety of high and low angled shots to make the Daleks appear more daunting, and with part of the story set within a Victorian house, there are plenty of examples of Daleks emerging and retreating into shadowy areas, and disappearing sometimes with the exception of the glow from their light on the stalks, giving that extra sinister edge to them. Production assistant Timothy Coombe directed the now infamous destruction scene of the Daleks and the Dalek Emperor, due to Derek Martinez being preoccupied with the rest of the shoot. As mentioned earlier, the story was designed as being the final end of the Daleks, and the destruction scene as being the finale, signalling their end. However, Doctor Who creator Sidney Newman called the production team with a request not to kill off the Daleks. With all the scenes set up and ready to film, Coombe decided to include a light bulb within the Dalek Emperor that would pulsate during the destruction and explosions, giving the impression that there was a chance of the Daleks not being completely destroyed. The animated footage goes one further, with one of the Daleks still having a light on its eye stalk switched on. The task of animating the missing episodes was carried out by Studio 35, with directing duties by Anne-Marie Walsh. This was the same team that carried out the animation of the missing episodes for the previous story, The Faceless Ones, which is great for continuity, given that the Evil of the Daleks starts immediately where the Faceless Ones finish, and therefore, if you watch the stories back to back, the transition would feel seamless, given the same styles of animation used. I also feel that the animation is of a higher standard than the previous DVD release, The Web of Fear, in which I was fairly critical of the style of animation provided by Shapeshifter in my review for that story. With Studio 35, the animation is smoother, and the likenesses of the characters are of better resemblance, and does not detract you from watching the story in general. Studio work was split between Lime Grove Studios for the standard shoots and Ealing Studios for the final end shots, whilst most of the location shooting was carried out at Grimsdyke Mansion House in Harrow, just outside London, which doubled up as Theodore Maxtible's mansion. What's different here is that a lot of the interior mansion shots were also done on location, which on the one hand reduces the amount of set designs given the multiple story settings, but also gives a cinematic, realistic feel to the scenes rather than an enclosed feel you get in a studio. Unfortunately, not many images are around for this given the lost nature of the original film footage, showing how impressive this would have looked on camera in comparison to other Doctor Who stories. During the 1960s, the soundtrack for Doctor Who was often stock music. However, with The Evil of the Daleks, we have the music composed here by Dudley Simpson, who was working on his 7th story. Simpson would go on to score the music for the majority of the 70s Doctor Who stories, and his work on The Evil of the Daleks is an early insight into the arrangements of both orchestral and electronic music, depending on the characters, setting and mood in a story, which is very in key with the scores he wrote in particular through the Tom Baker era. The Evil of the Daleks was broadcast across 7 episodes from the 20th of May to the 1st of July 1967, and acted as the 9th and final story of Season 4, bringing Patrick Troughton's debut season to a close. This was also the last appearance of the Daleks during the 1960s, and signalled an end to the first wave of Dalek mania throughout the series. Despite its high quality, the story did suffer somewhat in the ratings, averaging at 6.4 million viewers, making it the least watched Dalek story of the 1960s. This can be down to a variety of reasons. Firstly, as mentioned, the wave of Dalek mania was waning, and more interest in newer antagonists, in particular Cybermen, was starting to grow. Additionally, the seasons made during the 1960s were particularly long, with Season 4 starting way back in September 1966 and lasting 43 weeks. And, as with some of the William Hartnell seasons, audience retention would reduce towards the end of the season given the longevity, and with Season 4 ending in the summer when TV viewing figures were naturally declining anyway. I do feel the production team missed a trick though with the title of the story, and although The Evil of the Daleks does summarise the general theme of the story, the build-up of Episode 1 up to its ending doesn't quite have the magic as it should warrant, merely by the fact that the inclusion of the word Daleks in the title gives way to the fact that the Daleks are the instigators. I feel that by including the word Daleks in the story, there was an emphasis put in place to spike audience interest prior to the story, rather than during the story. As for the story itself, Whittaker's writing and the variety of different settings keep you, as a viewer, intrigued and engaged in the story. Even though the story is designed as an end to the Daleks, this didn't stop David Whittaker adding more character to them, as he also had done with the Power of the Daleks, as well as bringing in new concepts and ideas to the antagonists. As we know, this wasn't the end of the Daleks, but merely the beginning in how they evolved over the years to still maintain audience intrigue, although they won't be seen fully on Doctor Who for another 5 years, when they returned in 1972 for the John Pertwee story, Day of the Daleks, which began the second wave of Dalek mania. From now on, the Daleks will be perceived as more sinister and scheming, whilst also using human figures as pawns and puppets in their plotting. As well as the characterisation of the Daleks, some of the themes and ideas would later be reused throughout the years of the Dalek stories that followed. The theme of in-Dalek fighting was resurrected during the 1980s, with Davros creating a faction of Daleks loyal to him. Another Dalek Emperor made a surprise appearance in the Ninth Doctor story, The Parting of the Ways, and once again seemingly being the overall ruler and controller of the Daleks. Also, the idea of a Dalek-human hybrid was looked into a lot deeper in the 10th Doctor stories, Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. This to me gives the impression that when Doctor Who was resurrected back in 2005, and the idea to bring the Daleks back to by the production team led by Russell T Davies was to use stories such as Evil of the Daleks as a blueprint for their character, rather than just focusing on Dalek stories post-Genesis of the Daleks, which orientated as much around Davros than just purely the Daleks themselves. As such, The Evil of the Daleks is arguably as influential on Dalek characterisation as their debut story back in 1963 or 1975's Genesis of the Daleks, which developed their backstory. Without this story being as strong in structure and Dalek development, the Daleks themselves may have not carried on to this day as well as they have done. So, that concludes my review on The Evil of the Daleks. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video. If you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.